If you are a man over 60, I want to tell you something you have probably never heard from your regular doctor. And I hope you really let this sink in. Because for most men, this is the age when mornings start feeling heavier. When you wake up and it takes a little longer to swing your feet over the side of the bed. When the thought of intimacy starts to slip quietly into the background. When you catch yourself avoiding the mirror because deep down, you feel like a different man than you once were. Most guys figure this is just how it goes. You hit a certain birthday, the machine slows down, and the best you can hope for is to manage the decline with a handful of pills and a half-hearted shrug. But let me share a quiet truth I have learned after more than 30 years of sitting across from men just like you. It is often not your age. It is your fuel. My name is Dr. James. I am 63, an American physician who has spent over 3 decades focusing on the unique struggles men face as they move into the later chapters of life. Not just the medical charts or the lab numbers, but the real stuff. The gentle doubts you carry, the way your shoulders drop a little lower each year, the way you wonder if your best days are behind you. I still remember a patient named Robert. He was 67 when he first came into my office. Big man, used to run a small construction company, hands like shovels. But his grip was soft when we shook hands, and his eyes did not quite meet mine. He told me quietly, almost like he was confessing a secret, that he just did not feel like himself anymore. Tired all the time. Not as sharp. Even said his wife had stopped expecting certain things from him, which stung him more than he wanted to admit. Now most doctors might run a couple of tests, prescribe a pill, and send him on his way. But I asked Robert about what he was eating. About his mornings, his stress, the quiet habits that stack up over time. Because here is what I have seen again and again. Your body is not done. It is not broken. It is simply waiting for the right kind of fuel. The kind that speaks the language of your blood, your heart, and yes, your confidence. When Robert made a few small changes, it did not just shift his energy. It shifted how he carried himself. His wife came up to me months later at the grocery store, gave me a little hug, and whispered thank you. Not because of a miracle drug. But because Robert had started looking and acting like the man she married again. I want that for you too. So if something in this stirs a tiny spark of curiosity, stay with me. Because what we are about to explore next might sound almost too simple, almost too ordinary. And that is exactly why it works. Over the past 30 years, I have lost count of how many men have sat across from me, lowered their voices, and said something like this. Doc, I think I missed my window. Maybe this is just how it goes from here. It is an easy story to believe. Most guys grew up toughing things out, pushing pain aside, swallowing pride. So when things start to slip, they quietly accept it. Less energy, less drive, less spark behind the eyes. They figure it is part of the price for having made it this far. But if there is one thing these decades in practice have taught me, it is this. The male body is not nearly as fragile as people think. Even in your 60s, 70s, or 80s, there is a quiet power under the hood just waiting for the right chance to show up again. I once treated a man named Thomas. He was 74, a retired firefighter, still broad through the chest but walked with a slow shuffle. Said to me with a tired smile, Doc, I am just trying to stay upright long enough to see my grandkids graduate. When I looked at Thomas, I did not see a man past his prime. I saw a machine starved of the right input. Years of grab-and-go meals, coffee instead of breakfast, long shifts that never truly ended even after he hung up his uniform. His body was begging for a different kind of support, not because it was failing, but because it had been overlooked for too long. So we started simple. A few adjustments to what he put on his plate in the morning. A gentle nudge to get outside for a slow walk after dinner. A way to breathe deeper and let the old stress move through him instead of piling up in his shoulders. 3 months later, Thomas came in, dropped down into the chair across from me, and laughed. Said, I do not know what kind of voodoo you have me doing, Doc, but I feel like someone oiled my joints. Even his voice sounded brighter. That is why I still believe so deeply in the male body, even at ages when most folks give up on it. Because I have seen it too many times. The moment you start feeding it what it quietly needs, the body remembers. It starts to respond, to repair, to rebuild. Not back to being 30 again. But back to a place of steady energy, quiet confidence, and the kind of grounded strength that lets you stand taller when you face the mirror. If you are willing, I would like to show you one of the simplest ways I know to start nudging things back in your favor. And it might just surprise you how close it already is. I want to tell you about a man named George. He was 72 when he first walked into my office. Neatly dressed, polite handshake, but he sat down with a kind of heaviness I see all too often. He took a deep breath and finally looked up at me. "Doc, I am not the man I used to be. My mornings feel slow, my energy is down, and intimacy is, well, it is pretty much gone." His voice trailed off there. Now George thought this was just what happens. You hit your 70s, things slow down, and you try not to think about it too much. But what stood out to me was not what George said. It was what he did not know. Because for so many men, the biggest issue is not really age. It is blood flow. When circulation starts to struggle, everything else does too. Your heart works harder, your brain feels foggier, and yes, certain private parts do not respond the way they used to. That is why I introduced George to something simple. Pomegranate. Most people think of it as just a pretty red fruit you sprinkle on salads. But pomegranate is packed with these tiny compounds called polyphenol. You do not need to remember that word. Just know they act like fuel for your blood vessels. They help your arteries relax and expand, so blood moves more freely through your body. One of the most important players here is something called nitric oxide. It is the little messenger that tells your vessels to open up. And pomegranate helps your body make more of it, naturally. What is beautiful about this is how quickly it can work. There is a clinical study that showed older men who drank pomegranate juice every day noticed improvements in circulation and firmness in just 2 weeks. No side effects, no awkward pharmacy runs, just a natural way to support what your body wants to do anyway. George agreed to try it. I had him drink about 6 ounces of pure, unsweetened pomegranate juice every morning. That was it. No big overhaul, no fancy routine. When he came back 2 weeks later, he looked lighter. Sat down, gave me a half grin. Said, "Doc, my wife keeps looking at me funny again." We both laughed. That was not magic. That was biology getting the right support. The truth is, pomegranate does more than just help with circulation. It also calms down the quiet inflammation that chips away at male health and supports your prostate, which is a real gift for men who find themselves getting up too often at night. George told me he wished he had known this years earlier. I hear that a lot. But I always remind my patients it is never too late to start feeding the body what it truly needs. Now, as good as this little red fruit is, there is another piece of the puzzle most men completely overlook. And it is something you have probably walked past in the grocery store 100 times without realizing what it could do for you. Not long after George, I started working with another patient named Harold. He was 68, a retired accountant, still pretty trim, always wore a nice watch. But the first time he sat in my office, he leaned in a little, lowered his voice, and said something I have heard more times than I can count. "Doc, I just do not feel like a man anymore." He was not talking about the shape of his body. He was talking about something deeper. His drive was missing, not only in the bedroom, but in life. His mornings felt flat. Even the small things he used to care about did not seem to spark much interest. Now what Harold did not realize, and what so many men do not know, is that this often comes back to testosterone. Not just as a number on a lab report, but as a quiet force inside you. It is what puts a little fire in your belly when you wake up. Gives you that steady hand, that clear voice, that sense of purpose. And as we cross into our 60s and beyond, testosterone tends to slip. Not because we are broken, but because life has a way of piling up stress, poor food choices, late nights, all of which slowly choke off the body's natural hormone rhythm. That is why I suggested Harold start with something surprisingly simple. Half an avocado a day. He raised an eyebrow. That is it? I nodded. Avocado is loaded with monounsaturated fats, the kind that your body actually uses to make testosterone. It also has magnesium and zinc, two minerals that keep male hormones balanced. And vitamin B6, which quietly reduces cortisol, that stress chemical that eats away at testosterone over time. So Harold made it part of his morning. Sliced half an avocado next to his eggs, sometimes mashed it onto a little toast. Nothing fancy. When he came back about 10 days later, he looked more awake. Said he was sleeping better, felt more clear-headed, and there was a moment when he paused and sort of laughed to himself. "Doc, I caught myself whistling in the shower the other day. I cannot remember the last time that happened." That is what I love about this kind of care. It is not about chasing numbers or pretending we are young bucks again. It is about helping the body find its natural footing so you show up with quiet strength. The kind your partner notices. The kind your own reflection starts to notice again too. And what happens when you take this gentle hormone support and pair it with a little extra fuel that speaks directly to your heart and muscles? Well, that is where the real magic tends to build. Seeing how a simple avocado helped Harold rediscover that quiet fire reminded me of another patient, Walter. Walter was 73, a retired school principal, sharp mind, kind eyes. But when he came to see me, there was a weight in the way he sat down. He folded his hands, looked at the floor, and said, "Doc, I feel tired all the time. Not just in my body, but in my mind. Even in my spirit. That kind of fatigue runs deeper than just needing a nap. It is like the pilot light has gone out." Walter told me most mornings he skipped breakfast, just poured himself a coffee and hoped his energy would show up eventually. But by 10 or 11, he was already drained, and afternoons felt like he was walking through mud. So I asked him to try something simple. Start each day with a banana. Nothing special, just a banana paired with a spoon of nut butter and a glass of water. Bananas are one of those everyday foods we all take for granted. But they are packed with potassium and magnesium, which quietly help your heart pump more efficiently and your blood vessels stay relaxed. They also deliver natural vitamin B6 that help your body produce steady energy right down at the cellular level. Bananas have something else too. A bit of tryptophan, which helps your brain make more serotonin. That does more than lift your mood. It steadies you, keeps your thoughts from spiraling, gives you a little buffer from stress. When Walter came back a couple weeks later, there was a subtle change in how he carried himself. His shoulders were a bit straighter, his eyes a bit clearer. He smiled and said, "Doc, I actually made it through the whole morning without feeling like I needed to sit down. My wife says I seem more present, like I am actually here again." That is the power of giving your body the right kind of simple, honest fuel. It does not come in a fancy bottle. It does not promise to make you 20 again. But it helps rebuild your energy from the inside out, in a way that lasts. And when you start stacking these small, natural shifts together, better blood flow, steadier hormones, more reliable energy, well, that is when things truly begin to change in ways most men never thought possible again. What happened with Walter was a beautiful reminder of something I have seen again and again in my practice. Your body is not just a bunch of separate parts. It is a complete system, where everything quietly depends on everything else. That is why these three simple fruits, pomegranate, avocado, and banana, do so much more when you bring them together than when you use them on their own. Let me tell you about Richard. He was 69, worked most of his life as a mechanic, hands still rough and stained even in retirement. Richard had tried a few things over the years. Took a circulation supplement one month, a testosterone booster the next, and always ended up disappointed. When he came to see me, he was skeptical, even a bit gruff. Said, "Doc, I am tired of wasting money on stuff that does nothing. I told him I understood. Most men have been sold quick fixes that only look good on a label. But I asked if he would be willing to try something different. Not a pill, not a powder, just real food his body could actually use. So we built a simple plan. Each morning, 6 ounces of pomegranate juice to start opening up his blood flow. Half an avocado with his eggs to feed his hormones. And a banana with a bit of nut butter to steady his energy. Nothing complicated. Just a daily rhythm that spoke directly to his circulation, his testosterone, and his cellular fuel. About 3 weeks later, Richard walked into my office with this little half-smile. Said, "Doc, I do not know what you have me doing, but I feel like my body finally remembers how it is supposed to work." And that is exactly it. These fruits together do not add something foreign. They unlock what was already there. Pomegranate gets the blood moving, so every organ, every muscle, every part of your body gets fresh life again. Avocado helps your body restore its own quiet power, bringing testosterone back into a natural groove. Banana keeps your heart and brain steady, making sure energy does not sputter out halfway through the day. Together, they form a kind of triangle: blood flow, hormones, energy, each side supporting the others. When one improves, it lifts the next. Before long, the body starts working in harmony again, the way it was designed to all along. I have watched this happen with countless men, from their early 60s well into their 80s. It does not turn back the clock, but it lets you show up in your own life with more clarity, more confidence, and a steadiness that changes how you carry yourself. And if you are wondering how to start weaving these small changes into your own mornings, I would love to show you a simple plan you can begin tomorrow. It is easier than most men ever expect. By now you can probably see how these small choices work together. But I know it still helps to have a clear picture of what it might look like, starting tomorrow morning. I think of a patient named Frank when I talk about this. Frank was 66, a retired postman, who loved tinkering with old radios in his garage. When he first came in, he admitted he felt scattered. His mornings were all over the place, grabbing a pastry here, skipping breakfast there. By afternoon he was dragging, sometimes even nodding off in his workshop. So we built him a gentle rhythm. Something he could do each day without thinking too hard. I had him start with 6 ounces of pure pomegranate juice. Just enough to get his blood flowing, waking up those arteries and setting the tone for the day. Then he would slice half an avocado alongside whatever breakfast he liked. Sometimes that meant eggs, sometimes a little oatmeal. The healthy fats and minerals in that avocado started feeding his testosterone in a way no fancy supplement ever did. A little later in the morning, he would grab a banana, often with a small handful of almonds. That gave him steady energy to keep moving without the crashes that used to hit around 10:30. It did not take long. About 2 weeks in, Frank came by the office, leaned on the door frame with a grin, and said, "Doc, I do not know if I am imagining it, but my wife says I seem lighter. Like I am actually enjoying the day again." That is the beauty of this plan. It is not strict or punishing. It is not about counting grams or banning your favorite foods. It is about adding in 3 simple things that quietly rebuild your foundation from the inside out. Pomegranate for blood flow. Avocado for healthy hormones. Banana for calm, steady energy. What I love most is that it works gently, in the background, almost like your body sighing in relief. Before long, mornings do not feel quite so heavy. Your mind is clearer. Even small moments of intimacy or laughter start to come back without you forcing them. And it is often your partner who notices first. I cannot tell you how many wives have pulled me aside over the years, eyes a little shiny, to thank me. Not because their husbands turned into teenagers again, but because they seemed more alive, more present, more like the men they fell in love with. If you give this a real try, you might be surprised how quickly small shifts add up. And what comes next is often even more meaningful than just the physical changes. It is about how you stand, how you speak, and the quiet pride that starts to return. By now you can probably see how these small choices work together. But I know it still helps to have a clear picture of what it might look like, starting tomorrow morning. I think of a patient named Frank when I talk about this. Frank was 66, a retired postman, who loved tinkering with old radios in his garage. When he first came in, he admitted he felt scattered. His mornings were all over the place, grabbing a pastry here, skipping breakfast there. By afternoon he was dragging, sometimes even nodding off in his workshop. So we built him a gentle rhythm. Something he could do each day without thinking too hard. I had him start with 6 ounces of pure pomegranate juice. Just enough to get his blood flowing, waking up those arteries and setting the tone for the day. Then he would slice half an avocado alongside whatever breakfast he liked. Sometimes that meant eggs, sometimes a little oatmeal. The healthy fats and minerals in that avocado started feeding his testosterone in a way no fancy supplement ever did. A little later in the morning, he would grab a banana, often with a small handful of almonds. That gave him steady energy to keep moving without the crashes that used to hit around 10:30. It did not take long. About 2 weeks in, Frank came by the office, leaned on the door frame with a grin, and said, "Doc, I do not know if I am imagining it, but my wife says I seem lighter. Like I am actually enjoying the day again." That is the beauty of this plan. It is not strict or punishing. It is not about counting grams or banning your favorite foods. It is about adding in 3 simple things that quietly rebuild your foundation from the inside out. Pomegranate for blood flow. Avocado for healthy hormones. Banana for calm, steady energy. What I love most is that it works gently, in the background, almost like your body sighing in relief. Before long, mornings do not feel quite so heavy. Your mind is clearer. Even small moments of intimacy or laughter start to come back without you forcing them. And it is often your partner who notices first. I cannot tell you how many wives have pulled me aside over the years, eyes a little shiny, to thank me. Not because their husbands turned into teenagers again, but because they seemed more alive, more present, more like the men they fell in love with. If you give this a real try, you might be surprised how quickly small shifts add up. And what comes next is often even more meaningful than just the physical changes. It is about how you stand, how you speak, and the quiet pride that starts to return.